Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee. Joining me as my co host this morning is the benevolent and future governor of Virginia, TK Eppley, and Ravi Bhatia. We're going to be trying to answer a few questions this morning. And, per usual, my co hosts don't know what these questions are. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is Echelon Orchid.
Guess who's back?
Good morning, TK, but we lost Ravi somehow. I don't know what happened. But Ravi is missing in action. But TK, my friend, good to see you again.
You as well. I know we had a great pre-show with Ravi. I don't know where did he get to?
I don't know what happened. I'll text him to see if maybe he didn't. Maybe he thought when I removed from stream that it was over. But this is why doing a live show is so much fun. You just don't know what's going to happen. It's like doing a live demo.
And to the audience, I actually don't know what's going to happen because I'm never told what the subject matter is before the show.
Yeah. So, well, while we're waiting on Ravi to come back, in part of the pre-show we were talking about health, and what I didn't get to tell you is that so far, in these few months, I've lost 26 pounds.
That's awesome.
And this is just where I love technology. So I went more so than just about the weight. We went and got this scale called a REMPHO,
Yep.
RENPHO. So
Yeah.
it measures like everything. And what I found in doing all this is that one of the biggest things is I was constantly dehydrated. My body water was not in a good spot at all. And as I increased my water intake, and really what was more than just water, it was going and getting the specific electrolyte mix to put in there,
Right.
that added. Everyone's always talking about how salt bad, salt bad, salt bad. Evidently, salt helps you quite a bit in getting your water retention where it needs to be. And then it was a matter of trying to find that supplement that didn't have sugar. This was not an easy task, but we found it. And so I do 2 of those a day plus my regular water, and I'm now in the green for that. And then at that point, the weight started coming off.
If you're not properly dehydrated, you're not losing weight. Your body goes into a state where it's going to save itself.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, salt's the enemy, salt's the enemy. No, sugar's the enemy. Right? To the vast listening audience, get rid of the sugar in your life, right? Period.
Yeah.
That's going to kill us.
Right. And that's one of the big things. And then of course doing, all the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I've never been a gym person. I've always just, for me, when we talk about like lifting heavy, back when I was doing traditional Chinese martial arts, the weapons were the lifting heavy, right? Because you start throwing these weapons around, it's going to be a workout, that's for sure. Still not sure what happened to Ravi though, but anyway. So one of the things that I found that was kind of interesting is that I said, okay, a lot of my younger employees or even students, they would ask me a lot of questions. And so I said, I wonder what kind of questions are really being asked to Google. And then, so I researched this, and of course there's stuff over there. So the top 10 most questions asked of Google in 2020.
Is this going to hurt my heart or what?
It is. It really is. 5 million. When are the NBA playoffs? 4,090,000. What's my IP address? 3.3 million. Where's my refund?
Ooh.
What 1.8 million?
Oh.
What is love?
Oh.
1.5 million. How to draw. 1.2 million. Where am I? Now this is the one that's really going to hurt your heart. 823,000. How many weeks in a year? 673,000. What are the early signs of pregnancy? 550,000 is Mercury in retrograde, and then 450,000, who called me? Those were the top 10 searches or questions asked of Google in 2020. So I'm actually surprised there isn't how many states are in the United States or how many stars are on the U.S. flag. I'm really kind of shocked that those are not in that top 10 of questions based on reading how many weeks in a year.
Wow.
So
I don't even know where to go with that. Again, I'm saddened for humanity.
So that got me to thinking, what comes off the top of your head is what's the most questions people ask you? I would imagine, as one of those is going to be as soon as they find out that you're a retired Navy SEAL, they want to spend like all their questions about that because, I mean, you've kind of said it like outside, in Virginia Beach or in, Southern California, you can find them. But outside of that, the chances of someone meeting a Navy SEAL is small. So, hey, Ravi.
Hey, I didn't get kicked out. I thought for some reason, that was the show.
Oh.
I'm an idiot.
No, that's the pre-show. Right. We ramble around on anything we want to talk about before Dan.
I'm gonna be back in like 2 seconds because I got a fresh pot of coffee. I'm gonna.
Yeah. Go ahead. Hey, this is why it's a live show, Ravi. You never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. You never know. Exactly. Yeah.
It's all part of the magic.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So give me a second. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So my guess is that's part of a lot of where people spend questions. But once they get past that, then what?
It's too different. It's actually the whole SEAL thing's not the whole SEAL things, especially like coming in as when I come into a company and whatever level I'm in, I'm usually in the executive team. And so, and especially now, the company that I've been asked to lead, the SEAL questions, they're never first, right? Because most people don't, even if they want to know, there's a trepidation about asking, right? A lot of where we start are basic how-to questions about work, right? You come in, you're replacing somebody. People want to know your philosophy of leadership, what's important to you, and things like that, right? And so I get a lot of those questions, which I love. I mean, that's the whole reason you show up to lead a business, right? Is you want to have a net positive effect on everybody that is around you, and so that can be easily done. It's like the first day that I had done a turnover with the founding CEO, who was extremely gracious with his time, and then I said to one of my direct reports, I said, look, on Monday when I come back, I want to buy everybody lunch and we're going to sit around and we're going to work through it. Right. And so we basically just stopped all the machines and at noon and we had pizza and salad and everything like that. And people got to ask questions. And not one of the questions was about me being a SEAL or my background. Right. Which, I mean, if you type my name in, publicly available, pretty much they can get a good idea. Right. But a lot of it is, and I think from experience, and you have similar experience when you show up, is, hey, you have to start giving people your context of decision making and what's important to you, right? Because that's really what they want to know. People want to know how to please the boss, and you have to tell them, hey, you're not here to please me. We're here to make, we're here to do great and be innovative. And so I think that once I've built a comfortability, right, whatever they didn't enjoy about the previous leader, that I'm not that guy. I might have different issues, but they're not seeing the same. It's like when you build a house, right? Whatever bothered you in your last house, you make sure you fix. You don't know what you're going to dislike in your new house, but you're not going to have the same problems that you had previously, right? So once you get past that, and then some of those questions will start, right? And they usually don't start because it's a direct question. And a lot of it is because, you know, the folks that work with us, I think 1 or 2 of them are over 30, right? So there's a delta in age, which there's a delta in life's experience. And that delta in life's experience, in a lot of ways, is who my network is, right? And so when somebody says, hey, we're gonna do this, I go, well, why are you calling that guy? He can't help you. Let's call the guy, right? And they're like, oh, you know that guy? I'm like, yeah, how'd you meet him? Well, then sometimes it's like, well, when I was a SEAL, I did this with this guy, and, you know, the round robin that happens there. And that's when they start to see things that then they'll ask questions, right? You want to know the question I get asked most often, whether I'm speaking or even in an employment setting? What's the hardest thing you've ever done as a Navy SEAL? Right? Because everybody wants to ask the question about being in combat and shooting it up and all that other stuff, right? But that's never my answer, right? And it's about perspective, right? Is really what it is. And I had the same the answer that I say I had heard from a Vietnam era SEAL when I was a young frogman. I didn't grasp it until I was in it. And the answer is standing next to a mom while she cries over her son in a casket, right? And people it stops all the low level dumb questions, right? Because when I'm speaking and we talk about, you know, I talk about, I said, look, most things in life aren't hard; they're just complicated, right? And so when people at the end of it, like if I go and do a keynote or whatever, they'll ask, you know, was combat hard? I go, no, it's not. It's complicated. You're going to get there. Somebody's going to drive you there. Somebody's going to fly you there. You're going to get on a boat. You're going to jump out of an airplane. One of those things is going to get you on the battlefield. What happens next is complicated or can be complicated, right? And so when people start, the questions that people ask now we're past that, right? Now it's about, hey, here's the goals we've laid out. How do we get there, right? And that's when you start the magic starts happening. But, you know, Ravi, you lost it for a second. Dan read off the top 10 Google searches for 2020, and it would hurt your heart.
Yeah, so it was really the top 10 questions asked of Google in 2020. And I got to thinking about this because I get asked a lot of questions from my junior employees or students. And one of those, because what happened to be like the question that really, you know, hurt my heart as well was, it was number 8 on the list, which was, how many weeks in a year?
What?
Yeah. So it's like, okay, maybe they're, I mean, I could see if the person was like 5 years old might ask that because they may not know that there's 52 weeks in a year yet, but I don't know many 5-year-olds that might be able to actually spell all of those things out and type it into Google. So, so I started to, so the question I asked TK, which I would put to you as well, what do you think is the most thing that you get asked about the most? I mean, especially because, I mean, actually, I haven't asked you this yet, and I forgot to on the pre-show. What's your status on your book that you're writing?
Yes, that's a serious question. Well, yeah, it's not going as fast as I'd hoped, but with the job change, I'm really focused on work right now. But yeah, that's a great question, and I know we had made a commitment, right? So yeah. the books, it's coming along. I'd say I went from 30% to 40%, so it's pretty good. I do have a digital publisher who has agreed to do all of the editing and graphics because then I can focus on the writing and he'll focus on prettying it up, So it's delegating the things that we're not really good at. And I think that's part of business, right? If you're not good at something, just give it to, you got to subcontract it out. And that's also what we do in construction, right? If there's something that we could do ourselves or self-perform or we're efficient at, we should do that thing. But it's like, make or buy, right? If you can make it, great. But if you can't make it economically and functionally the best that you can make it, then buy it. And that's the only two choices, really.
I would go one step further. The higher you move up the executive team, the less you should do, right? Your job as a leader of an organization is to empower everybody around you to make decisions far in excess of what they thought they could.
That's brilliant. That's exactly right.
And with doing it, it's a great, Jeff Bezos says this, and it's the best line I've ever heard about being a leader. My job as a leader is to break ties, right? When you've got 3 or 4 smart people that have empowered smart people, and those decisions percolate to the point where we're making that, executive decision about where the company's going, what we're going to buy, what we're going to do, I should be presented with options. Correct. And I should have to make a decision. And that decision is breaking a tie amongst the team that we can't decide A or B what we're going to buy, what we're going to do, where we're going to go.
That's actually the central focus of my book, is to combine, is to really promote this idea of project leadership, where leaders, so as an engineer, you're paid to solve problems. Right. As a project manager, you're solving problems, but you're also delegating. But as a leader, as a project leader, your real job is to empower people, remove the rocks in the road, and make sure that you've got a team of people, great people who you are empowering to solve problems. Because if you're solving the problems, you're not the leader.
Right.
The thing that I tend to get asked quite often is when we start talking about like how you make decisions, and like, because I always wonder, like, how did you know this was going to happen? And my question, I always, in this particular case, ask a question or answer the question with a question, which is, how much time do you just spend every day just thinking? And for me, it's typically just thinking, 2 to 3 hours a day is my average, somewhere around there. I used to keep a log of it, but some of them came back because they had to think about it, and then they'd come back to me and they're like, I don't know that I spend any dedicated time thinking. And I said, and that's why it seems like I'm so smart. We're really not. I've just been thinking about these problems longer than what you have. And then I start writing things down. I journal it out. Okay, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. If this happens, I'm going to do this.
I would argue that you spend probably even more time thinking, because we are always thinking, right? And the best thing to do with a problem is you're thinking about it, you sleep, and even while you're sleeping, that soup of ideas is germinating and it's really tempered by your experience. A lot of what I like to apply in project management is things that I've learned from the Eastern philosophies, from Buddhism and Taoism, which is what the book talks a lot about. And what I'm informed of is that, the Taoism teaches us, and they have a premise called the Tao does nothing yet leaves nothing undone. And it's really hard for the Western mind to capture this. And it took me a long time to understand it. And what it means is that our work has to be aligned. What we say, what we think, what we do have to be consistent. And once we're consistent, it doesn't feel like work anymore. It flows naturally. And that's what it means by not overdoing it. And it's a tough principle, because it's not that we're lazy. It's just that we need to be aligned internally before we can tell people what to do.
Well, and it doesn't fit into Microsoft Project.
That's right.
No, it probably doesn't.
That's the bigger thing. And when you talk about sales, if it doesn't fit into the CRM system of Salesforce or whatever, and we can't get a metric out of it, right? That thing. And I think when you talk about sales, Pierce's law says that the square root of the number of people on a project provide over 50% of the value, right? And so if you go in, and it's almost immutable. If I ask sales leaders, how many salespeople you have, and they go, oh, I've got 12, right? And I'm like, so you got 3.5 people that are killing it, and everybody else is useless. So like, how'd you know? Like, like I'm something. I was like,
there's a TED talk on this. Exactly what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. It's where I got it from, right? And this is, the more you look at it, and what do? We basically focus on the bottom third, right? We focus on the thing you're never going to fix, rather than feeding the things that are working. We say, because internally as leaders, when people or systems are failing, a lot of times we haven't contemplated what that looks like and what the action should be, right? Here's the thing. You're never going to get full compliance and everybody's going to be making their number, right? So what do we think about? The future is, how do I combat against keeping substandard performers? What's my metric, right? And the metric is not to add more fields, for example, into Salesforce. So you force the people that are A players to spend more time filling out paperwork and less time selling, right? They get mad, but what do? They jump to somewhere that is more compliant. They're gonna continue to make money. You don't strip half their territory away and give it to somebody that's subperforming because okay, that territory is working. The territory is not working. The person's working. Right. And you think about this in strategic terms, right? In order to be a great leader, I'm not thinking about today. I'm already thinking about next year, next 5 years, and it's more the kind of the focus gets broader, the more further away from today I move. Right. There's a group out there called the Long Now Society, and they imagine solving problems 10,000 years from now. Right. Wow. And between now and what a cool thing. Like when you talk about thinking, it's like, hey, what didn't we know? What don't we know today that will seem commonplace in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, 35 years? When I was a little kid, could we imagine having the internet?
That's right.
Well, that would be very difficult when you all were still using muskets back then.
There's a guy who wrote a book in 1980, which still resonates today. Michael Naisbitt wrote Megatrends. And the reason that was such a great book is because everything that he talked about was simple. What he said was that our knowledge is growing exponentially, technology is growing exponentially, and he said we need to balance high tech with high touch, meaning that soft skills are going to be the ultimate sort of driver of success, because you could have 100 engineers, but if you can't communicate and if you can't tell a story, and sales, if you cannot connect with the customer, then you're going to fail, right? And Bill Gates applied some of this in the 90s. He tried an experiment and he said, I wonder, because, the geeks he had working for him, the engineers, he said, maybe I could do this better. He said, I wonder if I could. He can't really teach them how to communicate, and the soft skills are very tough to teach. So what he did was he started hiring humanities majors, English majors, history majors, philosophy majors. And he said it's easier in many cases for me to teach them programming than it is to teach a programmer soft skills.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talked about bringing in Eastern philosophy, because one of the things that I've brought quite a bit into mind is one that resonates me in the Tao, which is dynamic balance. That particular, which I learned through Bagua, which is a traditional Chinese martial art, because if you're not making decisions that keep you in that equilibrium, and so for me also, just how can I maintain stability within myself and within my team? Because if there's too many things on the extremes, it can be a problem. So that was, I was reminded of that as you were talking about the Tao.
The Tao and also Buddhism, what it teaches us is that ego is a great destroyer. And I've worked in construction enough. I work for private developers, and the single greatest toxic, destructive weapon ever created that destroys value on projects is ego.
Oh, in life.
Right. And I tell, because I teach and I'm teaching in Florida now, but I used to teach at NYU online, and I tell young engineers and project managers is that if you want to be a project leader because you think you're the boss, you're in the wrong business. You're actually just a servant. And if you want to be a boss, go do something else. And I gave them 2 rules. You don't get any credit. Don't take any credit for anything goes well. But when there's a failure, you better own up to it.
You have to assume the blame.
If you're okay with that, then you're a leader. But if you're not okay with that, if you're here for your ego, then take the door, because you're in the wrong business.
Here's the thing. I don't know. I can't remember where I heard this, and I think there's no more truer statement. The higher you go in an organization, the less IQ matters and the more EQ matters, right? And your ability to translate the larger goals and allow your people, right? This is where you in order to gain everything in life, you have to give everything. And nowhere more important than relationships. And to show up as what people would call the leader, the first thing you have to do is establish that I'm not here to make every decision or to tell you how to do everything. In a lot of ways, I'm here to ask questions, right? Because I want The quicker I can give you, when I talk about servant leadership, I'm talking about the context of decision making and giving that away. Because if you understand how I make decisions and how my philosophy on leadership, that then you can assume all of that. And I'm going to give you every bit of authority that I can. And in large cases, it's probably more than you've ever had in your life. And I want you to do the same thing with your subordinates, because in doing that, it empowers you to make decisions far in excess of anything you ever thought you could and imagine better outcomes, right? When I tell my biggest question, okay, why do we do that way? And again, it goes back to how much time have I spent thinking? And now I see something being done away, and I could walk in and say, no, I want it done this way. Right. But if I ask somebody why we do something a certain way, usually what I get is, well, we've done it this way because of X. But if we had X, Y, or Z, we could really do it a much better, more efficient way, bigger, better, faster. Right. I'm like, all right, great. Let's go do that. Right. And I have a history of going into companies that either aren't fully funded or, or just got funded. And so your predecessor was limited in what decisions they could make because of money in a lot of times, right? Or lack of money equals lack of people. And so they make decisions that aren't optimal, that just pushes things. So how can we, when you show up, especially and you go to a business that's now fully funded, say, if you could do it any way you wanted, what's the right way to do it? And then there's an education piece where somebody says, well, if we could do all this, and then they get super grandiose, right? And I'm like, okay, now let's talk about business structure. And yes, we could do it that way, but why am I going to waste all those resources, right? So now there's an education component. And I think people that are natural educators and like to teach people make much better leaders, because in order to be an educator, in order to want to impart information on people, you have to be a giver, right? Dan and I have worked for one of the most intelligent people on the planet, right? There's very few people that know more about how to financially engineer a business or like that. But he had zero desire to quell his ego to make the company better, right? And it's sad to me, right? It actually makes me mad, because you take somebody that is so gifted in so many things, but then a couple 3 years later, having that been a really bad experience for me, for my heart more than anything else, my soul, like every day of the week having to defend against that. But
people sell their souls in their careers, and I think you're right. I like what you said before, where companies have to focus on, how do you make the work environment structured in a way that engages people. And a few years ago, IBM went through this. I got to know the number 2 HR person at IBM through my connection at NYU. And they started using data analytics, and they found out their biggest problem was employee engagement, especially with smart engineers. And they found out there was 3 types of risk. There was attrition risk, there was engagement risk, and there was and they boiled it down to 3 things. Assuming you're paying your employees reasonably well and market value, what engineers and employees want is they want jobs that they find joy in. They want to be relevant, and they want to be engaged. And if you can find that, and that requires a level of humility from senior management. Simon Sinek, who's a great leader, and he's worked with the military as a consultant. Simon Sinek says that in general, people are not bad. It's just that they're put in bad situations. And he gave an example of one guy that he met who was serving him coffee at the Four Seasons. And he said, this is the most fantastic young man he's ever met. Brilliant. He gave him a $5 tip, and he was very happy with him. And that kid told him, it's funny, Mr. Sinek, because across the street, I work for a casino. I think this was in Vegas. And he said, there, I work for a small casino where they don't treat me well, and I'm considered the worst employee, because at the Four Seasons, they empowered him to make decisions. If he saw a problem with a customer, he had the authority to give them free nights and give them additional services. So the same guy is a bad employee and a good employee. How is that possible?
Well, to further on that, because I've seen that video, I think the important part is managers, right? Not just his manager. At the other place, every manager he came in contact with was always telling him what he was doing wrong. At the Four Seasons, and this is a great leadership tool, is everybody was asking, I would ask him how they could help. Right. And when you start, I think the big disconnect now is when you look at, leaders of companies and even bigger companies, you're talking about folks, usually men that are between the ages of 55 and dead. And so when I've talked to them, a lot of them are like, man, I just can't deal with all these young people. I'm like, we need to retire because they're the same age. You keep getting older. Entry-level people are always the same age. Junior employees are always the same age. You're moving away from that. They're not. Right.
Right.
When Dan and I worked together, one of the things we found that worked really well was, we were struggling paying people market rate, right? Just because of the economics of a startup. And advanced this idea of like, and I could pretty much do whatever I wanted, right, in the building. And this concept of what are you doing to be great today? And walking around and asking people, and how can we help, right? Because if you're individual, if you're feeling joy and not happiness is an if-then statement. If you're feeling joyful and you're engaged in what you're doing, more importantly, we're giving you enough information that you feel like you're part of the solution. Where you fit in. Now you're going to be better, right? You'll be better as an individual, and that'll make you better for us, right? Simon Sinek is funny because he spent a lot of time where I used to work when I was in the military.
Oh, is that right?
Oh yeah, and it's so much so that like I'll hear him talk sometimes, and he'll be drawing stuff. I go, wait a second, where? And then I'll see friends of mine. I go, did you guys give him a badge? Let him, he gets to show up as well. He goes, well, no, but he has. There's performance, there's behavior, and then there's trust, right? What I strive to do in every organization I'm in is to create a standards organization, not a rules-based organization. Because if we have standards, we used to say it at work, like if we're a standards-based organization, if we're going to jump at 3 a.m, I don't have to tell you not to be out drinking at midnight.
That's right.
Right? It's implied. You understand what it takes to meet the minimum standard and be a performer in the organization. That allows you to make decisions about your future where you don't feel like somebody's holding you down. Oh, they said I can't be out past 10. Because you know what happens then? Then you want to stay out till 10:05. Not because you want to do the wrong thing, but because you don't want the man to keep you down. Right? But if I say, hey, you're a responsible adult, you know what we're doing, and you know the rules of the road for success in whatever it is, plan your life accordingly. And by the way, when you need help getting there, I'm there to help you. The organization's there to help you.
Dan, you touched on balance, right? So one of the things that in the West, we and even in the East, in many cases, in industrialized societies, we have lost the concept as leaders of promoting balance, and balance is very important. People talk about work-life balance. I used to believe in a thing called work-life balance, but there's something more important. It's life energy balance. There are days that I'm energetic and I can work 20 hours, and there are other days where I just need a timeout. And I think that once you own your work and you own your own time, and which is what COVID has taught us, that people can work remotely and be very productive. If you are responsible and you are trusted, you can manage your own, let's say, chi or your own balance. That's huge. And we have lost the concept of that in the West, and we need to regain that.
Absolutely. And so I just finished Rickson Gracie's book, Breathe. I don't know how familiar you are with Rickson Gracie, but he is considered one of the greatest Brazilian jiu-jitsu and mixed martial artists of all time. And this aspect of balance, he doesn't really call it balance, but it's really what I think it is. Because he tells all of his students, and he even tells his sons that it doesn't matter when you're in that match if you win or lose. Right? It's that you're there and you're doing it and you're giving your all. And he goes, when they would win, I would tell them as we would dissect it, you won, but you could have won faster because you missed this opportunity and this opportunity to kind of get them back, to bring them back down. Yeah, you won, but there's still things you learn. He goes, and for those when they lost, I would tell them, yes, but you improved on all of these other things. And if you hadn't, you would have lost so much quicker in this match. And so he's raising them up about saying, look, here's where you're improving. And the other ones, he's trying to make sure that they're also continuously improving and removing their ego at the same time from when they won. And so it really resonated and got back into that aspect of balance.
The hardest lesson that I've learned And I used to beat myself up as a young project manager in this industry where there was so much pressure. And what I have learned, and what I think that a lot of business leaders have not learned, is that if you do the right things, and this comes right out of the East, if you do the right things, you have processes in place, and you are internally disciplined, and you are disciplined as an organization, the results of your work sometimes may not be there, but you've still done the right things. But if you focus only on the results, you will take shortcuts, you will do things that are illegal, immoral, unethical, or that don't meet your own standards. And so in many cases, we learn a lot more from our failures, but so we have a society that's driven by, you got to win. So what happened in the 80s? All the companies were based on quarterly stock performance. So now we are focused so much on the results that we lose sight, and Simon Sinek talks about this, of people. And we lose sight of the fact that if we do the right things, when we go to bed at night and we ask ourselves, did I have a great day? Did I touch my people? Did I engage people? Did I do the right things? If you did, then the results are whatever. I mean, you've done the right things. But if you only focus on the results, you will take shortcuts in life, and you will not have a great life.
Yeah, and that's why for me, and I tell all of my employees that, look, define what the minimum thing you have to do to say you had a good day. And for me, it's just two things. I need to learn something new, and I need to teach someone something new. And then we always go, well, why teach? I said, because one, it'll help me retain it. But even if that person already knows that information, if I teach them something and they already know it, then there's an opportunity for them to, correct what I may have gotten wrong in that little nuance. And at the same time, I just help that person fulfill a part of it because they just taught me something new.
Teaching and learning are actually the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just yin yang, right? Teaching, I have learned so much from teaching because it forces you then to raise the bar and say, how can I talk about this? Let me research it because I don't know it.
Right.
I don't know it enough.
You have to contemplate things to a depth and a breadth that you never otherwise would have if you were just trying to educate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was asked this question, and they were putting it in the context of cybersecurity, but I don't really think it has to do with that as a whole. And so I'll ask both of you this question, which is, what do you think is the biggest overall threat to the United States?
Apathy.
Ignorance as individuals, ignorance as a society, lack of appreciation or lack of sort of perspective on history. But ignorance is the great destroyer. Ignorance and ego.
Ignorance and ego. TK, you started with apathy.
It is. I mean, people are apathetic now, right? Again, it goes back to, hey, somebody tells me this is the way the government's supposed to work. I just blindly accept it. Nothing about, our system of government is very difficult. It's why when new countries have sprung up in Eastern Europe after the wall fell down, every one of them pretty much chose a parliamentary system, right? Because it's easy to quantify.
It's easier.
Right? This being determinate about self-government, is very difficult. And people don't want difficult, right? They want an easy button for everything, right? We talk about it all the time, whether it's your health, your weight, whatever it is, everybody wants an easy button. The apathy comes when you allow our representatives, who now we start calling our leaders, right, which is constitutionally incorrect, and you start letting them just make decisions and go while they're, because hey, it's just too big a task, right? And so you become apathetic. Let's take the poverty, right? The destitute portions of America also have the most violence. Why? Because it's apathy, right? If you truncate hope, things like the gun violence to the level it happens in major metropolitan areas like Chicago, like New Orleans, like New York, like DC, pick the major cities. Because if you have a group of people whose best day and worst day simultaneously happen, meaning there's no room in their minds, they have no room to improve, and the worst, they always think they're at the worst they can be, then it allows you to walk up and shoot another human. And it's not a big deal, right? That's the problems we don't want to address, because those are difficult. And we can keep them in small pockets that don't generally affect the entire U.S. populace. And so people are allowed to ignore that. But that is a social ill. That's not a gun violence problem, right? There's mental health involved with homelessness, and all those things. Like, and people are just giving up on it now. Like, oh, we're just going to put them over in this part of the city, right? And San Francisco has a violently bad homeless problem. But what do? They just push it into a portion of the city and hope that tourists and everybody else don't notice. What happened in DC in the 80s? Homeless people and violence was making its way up to where all the diplomatic residents were and everything like that. And so what they pushed it in the Southeast. Southeast became incredibly violent and incredibly impoverished. Well, then when they built the stadiums there and all, kind of gentrified Southeast, where did all those people go? I ask that to people all the time. They just didn't give all these people a lotto check and educate them correctly, and they suddenly became productive citizens. Where did we push them to? Right? And it's that out of sight, out of mind behavior from our representatives when you deal with people, that those people can't help elected officials get elected. So it's great. Keep them in poverty, keep them ignorant, and then basically say, hey, your best and worst day happened simultaneously. And if you have a penal system, nobody cares. Right? That's the apathy I talk about.
It's the apathy and the ignorance really relates to our system of education. Mm-hmm. We don't even teach civics. Oh. I remember going to first grade in India. I had a class in civics as a first grade.
I did grow up, and Dan and I have talked about this on multiple episodes of, we teach social studies now, right? We don't teach people how the system of government works, so that when somebody stands up and says, hey, I'm in charge, and everybody wants the president to be in charge, right? Why? Because it's one person and it's easy to contemplate that. What most Americans are not taught or don't Google anymore is that by constitutional design, the legislative branch is the most powerful branch. The power of the presidency has always been in the bully pulpit of the office, right? And if you don't like your roads, you don't like your bridges, go elect yourself a new congressman. You don't like your foreign policy, go elect yourself new senators, right? And that was said growing up because the power of the country resided in the legislature. In the last decade, the single most damaging thing the legislature has done is not pass a budget every year. It stifles innovation, small businesses. Your company, Khaki, Booz Allen, they can survive losing $10 million a week for 6 months while the government, fiddles around, because when they finally pass that continuing resolution, all that money goes back into their bank account. Small business can't survive. Innovation can't survive if there's not a consistent flow of money to the innovation.
Yeah. I'm going to say something controversial. Our system of education, primary education, we've got great universities and colleges, but I'm talking about grammar school, elementary and junior high and high school. Our system of education, it all depends on your zip code. And as long as that's true, we've got a fragmented education. A guy wrote a book, I think it was Bloom, wrote a book about 20 years ago called The Cultural Illiteracy. We don't all assume, we should all have a common base of knowledge and values as a society, at least understanding our history. And the sad fact is that if you're fortunate enough to live and grow up in a good zip code, you'll get a better education. And if you're not, you'll get a relatively poor education, and you may not know the things that are expected of you. And that's a sad indictment.
I think one thing that COVID's really highlighted is the iron-fisted grip that in a lot of areas the teachers union has on education. Right? Agreed. Parents are frustrated because they don't feel they can decide the future of their kids' education, what they learn, how they learn it, and everything else.
Our education system is corrupt.
Right. Well, if you're talking about the best possible outcome is, I think our public education system right now is designed to create the next generation of worker bees.
Exactly.
Right. And typically, if you look in society, A students work for B students, C students own the company, and D students dedicate the buildings. Right. The average GPA of a billionaire in this country, whether they graduated from school or not, in most cases they hadn't, is 2.9.
That's about right.
Yeah. Because a 4.0 student, I will never hire a 4.0 student.
No, you don't want that.
Ever. Right? I've always told my kids, go be a 3.5 student. If you got a B+ average in everything in life, your life's going to be really good. Right? Because now you start talking about if you look at how many people that have PhDs do you know that know very little about anything else in life? because they've had to be so
that's everywhere, right?
Right, but it's a universal constant. But when you start when parents,
that's why I have a DSC.
I know, yeah. When you start, I know, Dan. We all know, right? But the universal constant is that parents are frustrated, right? And again, when you go back to these large metropolitan areas where you have, the very impoverished portions, big sections of a city that are very impoverished, what are we doing for that? Has the public school system become a holding pen for the penal system? Right? That's a bad thing. Right.
So we also have a penal system. If we spend as much money and focus on our education system instead of figuring out how to lock people up, but people don't want to talk about education because of ignorance. Education, it starts with education, and I know this because I've been in the field, and I have taught students that came from different backgrounds, and they don't all have the same. They don't all have the same skill set or the fundamentals. I have taught graduate students from India and China that never actually wrote a paper in their life, and these are engineers going for a master's degree. Right. So I had to backtrack and say, wait a minute. I went in one case, I went to the dean and I said, why don't you have a course on research methods, because these kids are coming from a society where plagiarism is okay. They don't know any better.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You can't blame somebody for doing something if they've never been taught it's incorrect.
Right. It's interesting because the way both of you have answered the question is very similar to the way in which I did, which was, our inability to distinguish good data from bad data.
Yep.
And everything that you all said kind of sums right into that. There's ignorance, the education, apathy, because how can anyone know? No one today can really figure out easily what's the ground truth, what's the facts. Like, it's just all we get is spin everywhere,
right?
And it's so difficult. And so unless you've had a proper education, because they used to at one point teach critical thinking. They taught philosophy. Of my good friend, or TK's good friend Socrates.
Socrates, I love Descartes and Socrates.
Yeah, it's so challenging. But when I would go and recruit for the university where I did my doctorate, I would always go into like Baltimore City, and they would ask why. I said, because we actually can change their life. Like, there's a extremely high probability that if they graduate from this university, when they graduate, they're going to be making around $45,000 to $50,000 a year, and that's more than what their mom or dad makes. And then and then if they work hard, in 4 to 5 years, they'll be making 80 grand, which is more than what probably, if their parents are still together, it's more than what they probably make combined. Like, this isn't a dream. This is, because it's all in technology. And they would go, well, I don't have a computer. I was like, you don't need it. It's a beautiful part. There's a whole cyber lab dedicated to all this. You don't need anything. You can do it all from a Chromebook. And so many of them wind up going there, and their lives were changed dramatically because of education. These underserved communities, the education is they may say it's the same. It's not the same. It's not even close to the same.
When you talk about critical thinking, you look at, that's not every district, but to have any district in the U.S. say that we're not going to teach math and science in the way we are, right? I mean, the great thing about math is 2 + 2 is 4. Unless you're a chief financial officer, then you're going to say, what quarter does it have to be for?
Yeah.
Right. But because of math being a rules-based science, you start to have to think critically, right? And if you lessen or cheapen that, and here's the thing, there's a place for philosophy. There's a place for understanding the arc of time. It's why a lot of great investment bankers were history majors, right? Because they learn how to contemplate things over a much greater time than quarter for quarter earnings. And those, like Jeff Bezos says, when somebody compliments on having a great quarter, he's like, hey, we baked that into the plan 3 years ago. We're already thinking about 3 years from now. right? And so he goes, when I go back and I look, I go, yeah, we planned it. It should happen, right? All things being equal, because there was a level of engagement of critical thinking. A lot of times now you're saying critical thinking to be replaced by a philosophy class in logic. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but you can solve these problems a lot quicker if you value math and science. And because math and science education is difficult, we tend to, and when you do it, you can't indoctrinate kids about social studies as opposed to civics, right?
Well, I guess where I was going with that, or not to take away, which was we have taken away from the education.
Right.
One, we've bastardized the math and science, and we took away the humanities, which gets into that philosophy and things of that nature, right? So that way you've got both sides.
Exactly. Balance, right?
I had my daughter who's 15. I had her watch Dead Poet Society 2 weeks ago, and she was blown away. She changed her phone cover to Carpe Diem.
Right.
You know, and to your point, Dan, the real risk we have now is a society that cannot distinguish fact from fiction. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's just a tremendous astrophysicist and all that, he's great. He said that you're entitled to your own opinions, but you are not entitled to your own facts, because he said if you raise your children to be subjective about facts, he said, I'm going to teach my students to learn facts, and they will run Microsoft and Google, and your children will clean the offices of the people who are running Microsoft and Google.
Right.
That's how serious this is.
Well, that's what we talk about. Like when people say, "Hey, it's your truth." No. It's your opinion, and through hubris and arrogance, you'd like it to be the truth, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. And because nobody can disagree with each other without getting canceled or people's feelings getting hurt, right, or being offended, right? You do not have the right in life not to be offended.
Yeah.
Right. You have the right to be respected.
Right.
Right. But you don't have the right not to be offended, because in that offense comes innovation, comes discussion, comes discourse. Nothing in human history has ever happened without disagreements and turned out great.
And we're raising our children to be afraid of conflict. And conflict is by nature defined by the laws of economics. When you are running a business, or let's say you're managing a construction project, I always tell my students, unnecessary conflict is a very bad thing. But the fact is that you're going to have contractual conflict. You're going to have conflict of resources. You know why? Because those are the laws, the immutable laws of economics. And if you want to outlaw economics, then by all means, go live in an igloo somewhere. You don't understand reality.
Well, but here's the thing:
you want constructive conflict.
Constructive conflict. Yep.
Yeah, you want constructive conflict. I mean, you can't. This is where, I'm sure the adage was said before this, but in Game of Thrones, it's iron sharpens iron. There's a reason why. Like, if you don't struggle, like making great wine doesn't happen unless the grapes struggle.
Right. There's it's called the crushing, right? In order to make great wine, you have to crush the grapes, right? In order to grow as a human, you have to crush your ego. You have to crush yourself, right? It's like, if you look at any project management software, what do we try to define most quickly? The critical path. Because in life, if you understand the critical path, you can have the conflict before you have to have it in the moment. Right? You can define where the conflict's going to be. And in your life, what's the critical path of my life? And you go, okay, I don't know that. I'm going to have to go learn that. Right. And so we don't, in not teaching kids how to be critical about themselves, right, and have true introspection, right, and in conflict go, I'm not the best at that. Right.
You've got a generation of kids that are coming up, and we've taught them that there's a winner, everybody's a winner, and that you want instant gratification. So these kids, some of them will graduate from college and show up to work. You don't get a like for showing up on time. Nobody's going to give you a like for that. You're doing your job.
Right. Well, that's the dopamine fueled cycle that people live on, right?
Yep.
And it's why there's no dislike button on social media.
Right. It's a drug.
Right? But here's the thing. So think about this. If you put on all social media a like button and a dislike button, how many comments would you lose, right? Because most people, when they dislike something, they probably don't want to comment, but they end up commenting because they get enraged, whether it's a valid opinion or not. They get enraged at what somebody says, and so they come out and they end up saying stupid shit, right? And then all of a sudden they start deleting, going back and trying to erase.
YouTube has a dislike button on videos. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do that, but that's for the algorithm, so you won't get the suggested videos. That's the reason why they do it. So that way, in that suggestion slot, it's more the like videos won't show up. But people may not know that's the reason. They may be going, "Oh, I hate this," but you just now may not get more of that stuff now. But that's the reason why they do it.
Yeah. But so, like on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, if you just put a dislike button, what do you think the reduction in comments would be? Because most people just want to quickly express their outrage. Most people don't. Most people want to go, "I don't like that." Well, why?
Hey, so right? I have a beef with LinkedIn. How did LinkedIn become a social, like people are putting personal stuff on there? Like, what is up with that?
Microsoft bought it.
Maybe.
Everything that Microsoft touches winds up turning to garbage.
They're obviously not one of our sponsors, by the way.
No. I've been trying to do everything I can to get rid of Microsoft as much as I possibly can, but they keep creeping back one way or another.
It's funny because where I'm at now, my company we've been a Google shop, right? Well, our parent wants everybody in the portfolio to go to Microsoft, and so the engineers and all the smart guys that I have working for me, they want to stay on Google. And that life lesson to your direct reports is there's a lot of hills I'm going to have to die on to run this company. Do I want to start with which email client we use?
All right.
And they were like, well,
yeah.
Yeah, I know, Dan, you do, but it's just like,
well, because to me that the answer is much more than email. It's the amount of times that Google is attacked, their spam detection, all of their licensing models.
Totally got it. I'm down with you. You're not selling me, dude. I'm like, I'm part of the converted.
Dan, you're not a fan of Office 365.
Not at all. Not at all. No. I think it's not that Microsoft it's a bad product. I think it's overpriced and they don't do enough. There's much more they could do to protect companies that are using their product, and they don't do enough. There is a direct correlation for the amount of companies that are breached with it coming in through email. Microsoft's got the resources to be able to analyze that that link that was going to be clicked to know if it's malicious or not. They choose not to.
Right.
And even and that's just that's a fundamental thing that that they could do and just don't want to. Whereas Google does. Like I don't have to put a warning banner with stuff with coming in through Google and on Gmail, because it tells you when you have it as a company, hey, be careful. This came from an external link. Like, be careful if you're going to click on this. Like, if you're using Office 365 as a company, you've got to create all those things. You've got to add in all these. It's just, it winds up costing more in resources. Like my FTEs, if they spend more time fixing and unable to innovate and think where we need to go because of Microsoft. So Anyway, that'll be my last word. I'm trying to keep things around an hour. So Ravi, you got 60 seconds for a last word. Whatever you want to say.
Just want to. I'm excited about innovation. Excited about the rebounding of the economy, and excited about education. And we need to continue to drive this passion. We have the greatest engine of innovation. It's called the American system of freedom and capitalism, and we need to continue to promote that and leverage that.
Well said, sir. Thank you. And TK.
Ravi, it was great to meet you this week.
Thank you, sir.
Look forward to you being back on with us. And Dan, I'm just happy that we're back every Sunday and we can do what we do and goof around for an hour. Yeah. And hopefully some people continue to enjoy what we do.
Yeah, and hopefully YouTube won't deplatform me again for a little while. Every time we brought up anything regarding the election and dissecting stuff, boom, nope, can't promote. They just didn't like it. So anyway, gentlemen, thank you so very much.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Ravi, TK, I will send you all each other's contact info so you can
Awesome.
do some stuff there. I appreciate both of you coming on. Everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in, and take care. See you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye-bye. Take care.